Before the son of Sam was commanded by his neighbor's dog to go out and kill, and Ted Bundy's misogynistic victimization of women, it was the time of Dean Corll, a Texas middle-aged man known as the Candyman. Corll wasn't like other killers who roamed freely in the United States at the time, killing women. He had a strong liking for young teenage boys. His intention? Torture, sexual assault, and murder of these youngsters. Together with his two accomplices, Corll amassed a body count the likes the world has never seen, 28 in total, wrapped and soaked in lime to speed up the decomposition process. It was a gruesome tale that put a dark shadow over America in the early 70s. It's common knowledge that a serial killer's depravity can be traced back to some kind of horrific childhood event. But based on what's known about Corll's early life, it's tough to imagine that anyone could have ever predicted that he'd become a murderer, and not just any murderer. Born on Christmas Eve of 1939, Dean Corll grew up in a combative home, his parents quarreling constantly. They were divorced while Corll was still an infant, then remarried after World War II. But Dean's father provided no stabilizing influence regarding his children, with thinly veiled distaste resorting to harsh punishment for the smallest infractions. But as far as anyone can tell, there was nothing especially unusual about the fights at home. After the parents got divorced a second time, his mother decided to spend some time traveling around the South. She eventually remarried a traveling salesman, and the family settled in Vidor, Texas. In school, Corll was a well-behaved young man. His grades were decent enough to escape notice either for good or for ill, and he occasionally dated girls from the neighborhood or from school. So what turned a normal kid during the 1950s into America's most prolific serial killer in the 1970s? When they had moved to Texas, Corll's mother and his stepfather had started a small candy company called Pecan Prince, initially working from the family garage. From the very start, Corll played a crucial role in the company. In 1964, Corll was drafted into the military but received a hardship discharge a year later to help his mother with the candy company. Not to be confused with the Clive Barker film Candyman, Corll picked up the nickname for his reputation of giving out free candy located conveniently near an elementary school. Corll would often hand out candies to the children walking by or hanging around the area of the shop. This uplifted his image in the neighborhood. He was the always smiling Candyman. However, the reason for the innocence was very sinister. A number of male teenage employees who worked with Corll at the candy store reported that he often seemed to come off as flirtatious. One young teenage boy who worked at the company complained to Corll's mother that he had made sexual advances toward him, but rather than questioning Corll, his mother simply fired the boy. Corll kept hitting on young boys and building his trust. One of them was 12-year-old David Brooks, who, like many children, was first introduced to Corll with offers of candy and a place to hang out. Over 2 years, Corll groomed him, and by the time he was 14, Corll regularly sexually abused the boy and bribed him with gifts and money for his silence. This was the start of his obsession with teen boys, and it was about to get a lot worse. It all started in 1970 when Corll committed his first murder. Jeffrey Conan, an 18-year-old student who was hitchhiking from Austin to Houston. Conan was believed to have been looking for a way to get to his girlfriend's house, and Corll likely picked him up with an offer of a ride. Just a few months later, in December, Corll abducted 2 teenage boys and tied them to his bed in his home. He was in the process of sexually assaulting them when suddenly Brooks walked in on him. Corll initially told Brooks that he was part of a gay pornography ring and had sent the teens out to California, but later he confessed to Brooks that he had killed them. Corll promised to buy Brooks a car in exchange for his silence. Brooks agreed. The killer also told Brooks that he murdered the boys he'd been sexually assaulting and made the teen a grim offer, $200 for every boy he could lure to Corll's home and a car. Brooks agreed to the sick offer and quickly got to work. Brooks lured Elmer Wayne Henley to Corll's, but he didn't kill the kid. Instead, he groomed Henley to participate in his sickening scheme just like he did for Brooks. feeding him the same story about the porn ring before telling him the truth and offering him cash as a reward for his help in finding victims. However, he gave just $5 to $10 for each victim. Business was going well for Corll, who started abducting, assaulting, and then murdering teenage boys all over Houston. During the Houston mass murders, he would frequently move between apartments and rent houses, sometimes staying in one spot for just a few weeks. The most publicized of Corll's gruesome behavior was his use of the torture board, a slab of unpainted plywood 8 feet long and 2 feet wide with holes drilled into each corner. Corll would use the board by handcuffing a victim's hands to each top hole and binding their feet with nylon rope through the bottom holes. The board was featured in almost every one of Corll's murders. Once a victim was bound to the torture board, Corll could spend days torturing and molesting them. According to Wayne Henley, one of Corll's teenage accomplices, the more Corll liked someone, the longer they stayed alive and were subjected to his cruelty. Another rumored method of torture used by the Candyman was in his roving torture van. This large white van was outfitted with multiple pegboards drilled with holes that played host to nylon cords and handcuffs in a similar fashion to his torture board. Not much is known about the van, other than the fact that Corll used it to pick up the boys he kidnapped and also to dispose of their bodies once done with them. Corll was a psychopath who also forced the boys to write letters home telling their parents that they had found jobs in other cities and wouldn't be home for a while, presumably so their disappearance wouldn't be suspicious. They would wrap the bodies in plastic and throw them in mass graves housed inside of a boat storage facility, a lake outside of Sam Rayburn, and in shallow graves at the sandy shores of High Island. However, Corll's heinous crimes weren't going to last forever. After nearly 3 years and 28 known murders, Corll turned on Henley on August 8, 1973. On that day, Henley had lured 2 teens, Tim Curley and Rhonda Williams, to Corll's home. Williams was the only girl known to have been targeted during the murder spree. Corll tied Henley to the torture board and said, "I'm going to kill you, but first I'll have my fun." Corll had a gun on him. Henley begged Corll to spare him and said he would help him in the murder of the 2 kids. Corll agreed, and when he put the gun down, Henley picked it up and shot, fatally shooting Corll multiple times with a .22 caliber pistol. This was the end of Corll's killing spree. After that, Henley quickly called the police to confess what he'd done. He and Brooks soon made official confessions stating their involvement in the crimes and offered to show police where the victims were buried and all the bodies were recovered. And unfortunately, there's no telling how many others Corll might have killed that Henley and Brooks didn't know about. While both denied their involvement in the murders, Henley and Brooks both got life sentences. Since then, they've both been behind bars. Henley has even featured in the 2nd season of Netflix serial killer crime drama Mindhunter. Up until the day of Corll's death, only one boy was able to escape the clutches of the Candyman. His name was Billy Ridinger. Although he has refused to speak publicly about his story, he was present throughout Henley and Brooks' trials. He went in and out of the courtroom wearing a bag over his head in order to conceal his identity. It was Brooks who begged Corll to spare Billy's life, and Corll agreed to let the boy go. Had Ridinger gone forward to the police sooner, at least 15 young lives could have been spared. That's it for today, folks! What do you think about this crime story? Do you think Henley and Brooks should have been treated less harshly? Let us know in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for your regular dose of whodunits, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.